Today we're going to start out a quick set of notes just briefly talking about anatomical terminology. One reason we have to use anatomical terminology is so everyone has a general reference to what the part of the body you're talking about. So you start out with what is called the anatomical position, and this is the position. Anytime you're using these directional terms, you're thinking of the individual in the anatomical position. And the position is standing upright. Your arms are to the side and the palms are facing forward. Your feet are also facing forward. So here in a second we're going to talk about these directional terms. So if I'm using these, you always think of that individual in the anatomical position. Now, if an individual is face up, you would call them supine, and if they're face down, they're in the prone position. So the directional terms, when we're talking about, like I said, always in the anatomical position, superior is going to be above and inferior is going to be below. So if I'm using this directional term, I would say my nose is superior to my mouth. You also have anterior and posterior. So anterior is towards the front and posterior is the back. So my vertebral column is posterior, my sternum. Then we also have medial and lateral. This is when we're only talking about the trunk. Medial means closer to the midline of the trunk, and lateral means further away from the midline. So in this instance, it'd also be talking about your head. So you could say my nose is medial my ears, because it's closer to the midline. Now, proximal and distal is very similar, but instead of talking about the head and trunk, you're talking about your arms and legs or your appendages. So when we say proximal, we say that means it's going to be closer to the attachment site. So my elbow is proximal my carpals or wrist, and distal is further away. So when I talk about my digits are distal my elbow. And then the last one, I think you guys have probably heard these before. You have superficial and deep. When we're talking about possibly wounds or things like that, if you have a superficial injury, it's one that's just not right on the surface. But if you have a deep cut, it's usually gone through the dermis and epidermis, and it's more deep, closer to the internal organs and things like that. Now you also need to be familiar with the planes of your body. If you're looking at a cross-section of an organ or something, you have to be able to say what type of section you're looking at. So sagittal means that you have, it's separated right and left portions. The frontal or coronal would be they're separated and they have front and back sections. And then transverse is you have a top and bottom sections.